welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram.
Hey, what's going on, Will?
It's going well. And this week we have with us Christy Parker and Ann. Is it Tyndall? Tyndall. They are both from Protect Democracy, which is a cross-ideological nonprofit group dedicated to defeating the authoritarian threat, building more resilient democratic institutions, and protecting our freedom and liberal democracy. So welcome both to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess just to do some introductions or setting here, can you guys just describe what you do at Protect Democracy, and we can start with you, Christy.
Sure. So I'm a counsel at Protect Democracy. I do all sorts of things that lawyers do. I litigate cases. Prior to coming to Protect Democracy, I was actually at the Justice Department for almost 20 years. And for 15 of those, I was a prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division doing police excessive force cases and hate crimes.
Awesome. Great. And Ann?
Hi. I also am an attorney at Protect Democracy and do a range of work from, research and writing to litigating cases, to speaking with folks like you all. I've done a range of work at Protect Democracy, mostly work on protecting elections these days. Before I came to Protect Democracy, I was a lawyer in Washington in various roles in private practice in the executive branch, and then also did congressional investigations on Capitol Hill.
Awesome. Great. Well, I came across your folks' organization because of a article I saw or blog. I'm not really quite sure what the right term is, but it was a collection of words put together in paragraph form. It was called "How to Tell Government If Government Investigations Are Weaponized." So I want to start off there, but before I have you explain what it was about, I want to kind of put it in context because. So the former president, Donald Trump, he's under multiple investigations for a variety of different crimes he's alleged to have committed. Unsurprisingly, he's labeled a lot of these investigations a witch hunt, or, that the government is being weaponized against him. So maybe you can kind of settle the age-old question about this investigation or the multiple investigations. Like, is there a focused witch hunt to indict or to put Donald Trump in jail? And I'll let you into that first, Christy.
Well, there would have to be a lot of different focused witch hunts because he is the focus of criminal investigations in multiple jurisdictions, both state and federal. He's the focus of at least 2 federal investigations. And then that doesn't even, count the number of civil cases that he's on the other side of. We just saw a trial in New York involving the case that brought against him by E. Carrol. So there's a lot of smoke around Donald Trump. And I think that the most important thing for people to focus on, and it's hard in an environment where politics are involved and where, somebody was the former president of the United States and is likely to be, at least as we see things now, the nominee of his party for the next election. It's hard when people get attached to a political candidate to look at these things objectively. But the really important thing for people to focus on is not the politics of it, not what he stands for politically, not what he would do in office, but whether these things he's accused of make sense, whether the things that he's accused of match up with what we know from public reporting, a lot of which has been really in-depth and good, and whether it matches up with the elements of the various crimes for which he is being looked at, and then also looking at whether or not the people who are investigating and prosecuting him are acting in accordance with the rules and norms and laws that govern what they do. So, the reason that we wrote this report was to give people something they could look at to kind of have a checklist of what those things are, and to give them the ability to really cut through, the political noise and try to be objective about what we're looking here, because this is a democracy, and in a democracy, no one can be above the law. Doesn't matter how high you rank in corporate world, or how high you rank in political world, or how low. Everybody has to be equal before the law. And if we don't have that, then we don't have our very most basic ingredient that we need to have a democracy.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to ask you kind of a similar question, Anne. But before I do, I just have a quick comment about Christy, and I hope you're not offended by this. But like, has anyone ever told you that you look just like Maggie Haberman?
Oh my goodness, no. They have not. They have not. Maybe it's the glasses.
It might.
No, I've been told maybe this was from my past life, when I was younger, but I was told I looked like Ali Sheedy in The Breakfast Club. But no, never Maggie Haberman.
Okay, well, take that for what it's worth, and for if you're listening to this, you just have to.
She has way more access to Donald Trump than I do, so I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to bring to the table.
That's so funny,
Maggie Parker.
That's amazing, dude.
So Anne, with regard to the article, Chrissy just told us, some of the high level 30,000 foot view of these cases against Donald Trump. So how do we take the research and even the report that you included in the article, how do we take that and apply it to what we know about the cases against Trump and make the determination that, the investigations aren't, politically motivated?
Sure. I mean, I think, there are, as Christy referenced, some checklists in the report that sort of are the hallmarks of an upstanding investigation. Are there rules that govern the conduct of the prosecutors? Are they following those? Are they making pronouncements about guilt or innocence before doing investigations? There are some objective criteria by which we can assess these investigations, and I think one thing it's important to keep in mind is that in a system which, as Christy rightly described, no one is above the law, and even the most powerful can face prosecution when they violate the law, then necessarily we're going to have investigations where there are political implications. The fact that an investigation may affect politics does not necessarily mean that it is injected and motivated by politics. If you remove from possible investigation any case that would have political implications, then we can't live by the principle that everyone is above the law. Oh, no one is above the law. My goodness. Correct that.
I can edit
Nobody
that.
is above the law. Everybody is below the law.
She was talking about the upside down there for a second.
That makes so much sense.
Feel like we live in sometimes. Right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It does feel like we live in an upside down world. And I love the work that you guys are doing. It's pretty amazing, actually, to see. It's so helpful, even looking at your website, to help break down what's even happening here. Like, I love the questions that, helps us think through the kinds of questions that even someone could ask, as we get into a conversation about Trump and somebody who thinks they're guilty. He's guilty because they don't like him, or he's not guilty because they like him. And what does that have to do with anything? So I just love seeing that. And one thing that caught my eye was this interesting threat index. And apparently we are at a 2.2, or Trump was a 2.2, which is a significant threat. Germany is beating us. And so what I'm wondering is tie this to help us understand the significance of this, right? How important it is that we live in a country, number one, maybe help us understand what the threat, like why something is a threat or not, or why somebody would be a threat. I know you have some categories there. And Christy, we can start with you, then move over to Ann. But like, what is actually, what's actually going on with Trump, and connect us to the importance of like why we need this in our democracy. What is the importance of this kind of power that the people need to have in our democracy?
Yeah, sure. So I think in what we think of as normal politics in the United States, we have usually two candidates running for president. Maybe there's a third one sometimes, and they have different views about, what policies to enact, either domestically or foreign policy. Like, what kind of tax code are we going to have? How much money are we going to spend on this or that domestic program? How much are we going to intervene in foreign affairs, do this or that? But we haven't typically seen, at least in the last, half century, 100 years, people debating over whether we would have a democratic system of government, which is a government, by and for the people, where voters decide elections and where people who lose elections accept the result that they have lost, concede defeat, and walk away, rather than, say, fomenting an insurrection and having, a mob storm the Capitol to stop them from, having their power taken away. So I think what we're really seeing now, and the reason why that threat level is so high, is that we're now being presented with choices that are not about things like tax policy and how much we get involved in the war in Ukraine, but are the people going to decide elections? Is the loser of an election going to accept that he or she lost? And if we don't have those things, then we have something very different from what we've ever been taught or thought ourselves to have, which, even with all of its flaws, has at its heart fundamentally been government by the people, with our government leaders elected by the people, and peaceful transfers of power.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And would you mind kind of describing some of the metrics that you guys use to, like, how can you tell if a country is doing really good at this or they're doing really bad at this? And then what does that tell us about our country?
Sure. So, I think the most fundamental question in assessing that is the question of whether, when someone loses an election, we are able to have a peaceful transfer of power, and that, of course, as Christy just mentioned, is something we can't take for granted anymore in our national and in some of our state and local elections. That's one of the key pieces. There is also, we look at the freedom of dissent. Are people free to disagree with government and express their disagreement peacefully? And we see, both in when Trump was president, and his, for instance, intervening at DOJ in an AT&T Time Warner merger because he didn't like what CNN, one of the sub companies of AT&T had to say about his presidency. That's a
Wait, so what did he do? Help me understand that again. He
there,
as a president intervened.
There was a merger pending at DOJ in the antitrust division between Time Warner and AT&T. AT&T is the parent company of CNN. CNN was reporting accurately on President Trump, including criticism of some of his actions. And the president, the then president, reached out to DOJ in a way that he should not have, to suggest that, the merger shouldn't go forward, that there needed to be punishment for this criticism of him. That's one of the key questions in the report that you read. Is there independence between political elected officials and the
media, right?
of government. And Trump Trump trumped those those limitations with regularity.
That's crazy. Yeah, and I appreciate that you guys have this, I don't know, this assessment, and I hope that everybody gets a chance to look at it. I'll make sure that we put the link to it in our show notes. But I want to get back to the report that you guys created, the Investigating and Prosecuting Political Leaders in a Democracy. For those that haven't read it or seen it, can you talk to us a little bit about what's in it? Why'd you guys put it together? I mean, I love it. I think it's great. And I especially love the section you have in there about, questions journalists can ask politicians. Like, I just love that. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on whether or not you've seen journalists take pieces of that from your report. So you can start us off, Anne, if you want.
Sure. So, the one thing that I would draw your attention to, and that we haven't really touched on yet, but that is in the report, is the questions about how to assess congressional investigations, which are absolutely fundamentally different from prosecutions. Congress does not have prosecutorial power, and when they start to suggest that is what they're exercising, they're overstepping. Now, Congress also has very broad powers to investigate for purposes of legislation. And sometimes that means looking at government action and assessing whether the executive branch, or we would love to see the judicial branch, are following the norms and regulations that they have pledged to. I think what we're seeing in Congress right now is are some investigations that aren't following those rules, that aren't following the process of accommodations and trying to understand what's happening in the world. We're having congressional investigations where people are jumping to conclusions. You can always question an investigation if it begins with the premise that someone has done wrong. And there's a committee in Congress right now called the Weaponization of Government Committee. That's a conclusion. I would love to see an investigation into whether there has been abuse of the Justice Department or other arms of government. But when the conclusion is in the title of the committee, very unusual. You have to wonder whether it is a process meant to uncover the truth or a process meant to confirm preconceived notions.
Yeah, it's weird. It's kind of like it's a what's the word? It's a solution to a problem that they're searching for, sort of. So Christy, what do you think about the report that you guys wrote, and then we can transition to talk a little bit more about the Committee on the Weaponization of Government?
Sure, I'll come at it from the angle of criminal prosecutions, and I think it's very difficult for the public, and it's also very difficult for journalists when something involves politics and politicians and is inherently politicized. It's hard to cut through that and to examine, what are the actual merits of this thing that is happening? What are the actual merits of this criminal investigation? Not who stands to benefit from it politically or who stands to lose from it politically, but what's really at stake here in whatever is being investigated. What are the crimes that we're looking at? What is the evidence that this person who was once our president wants to be our president again? What is the evidence that he may have committed these crimes? And, what is the ability of our system of government going to be to hold him accountable for that if he needs to be? And so one of the things we wanted to do was to give a tool to both the public and the media to really look at the stakes, to really look at what is involved here in terms of what is the crime, what is the potential penalty, what is the significance of the crime, and what would be the significance for our democracy if we were unable to hold a person who may have done these things accountable for that simply because of the position he has held or wants to hold in the future. And that really is the stakes for our democracy. We wanted to kind of flip the script here, and rather than asking the question of what does it mean for our democracy to have a former president potentially be prosecuted for a crime, and to ask the opposite question, what would it mean for our democracy if we had a former president who committed serious crimes, who we could not hold accountable through the system we use to hold everyone else accountable? So that's really where we started from in wanting to produce this tool, was to give us all the ability to ask those really critical questions, and then to look at our institutions and how they're supposed to work, and hopefully really, give a sort of a teaching tool to folks who don't look at this every day, like to understand, here are how things work. Not everybody can be a juror and do jury duty or be a lawyer or be the judge. And these are really, critical components of the way that we preserve the rule of law in this country. So giving people a kind of a primer and a tool to understand how they are supposed to work, we thought was really important in this particular time that we're living in.
Yeah, in politics, there's no shortage of irony, and the fact that there is a committee on the weaponization of government. Also, there's the former president has a social media company called Truth Social. It's just, I don't know, it just cracks me up. But with regards to the committee I just talked about, it seems like most of the hearings they're holding center around issues that affect Trump, such as like the field trip they took to Manhattan when all the 34 indictments came down. So I'm curious on, if we all could agree that the purpose of their committee was righteous and altruistic. What types of issues in government would you be interested in seeing them address or have hearings on?
So I think that the notion that Congress can investigate whether the enormous power of prosecution, whether it is federal or state, is being deployed fairly, that is fair game in many instances for investigation. But what you want to see in such an investigation is, is there bipartisan cooperation in terms of the aims and targets of the investigation? Are the people they are talking to fact witnesses who can help them understand the circumstances of prosecutions, or are they, as was the case with the FBI agents they brought in, sharing secondhand information and conspiracy theories? Are they negotiating with the executive branch or state government, if there's a reason to be, looking at state government? Are they negotiating and trying to come to understanding about what documents are important, what testimony is important, or are they racing right to, public hearings with grandstanding? The church committee, which came out of the Watergate scandal in the 70s, conducted really important investigation into abuses at the FBI and in law enforcement, and did so with a bipartisan team of investigators who worked together and did not draw immediate conclusions about what the answers were going to be. They dug deep and did their work behind the scenes and shared with us their ultimate findings. And so far, we're not seeing that sort of approach in this weaponization of government committee.
Man, that's so it's so fascinating to hear all these things, the ins and outs of, again, you see such a limited picture in the media, and so many of us just have no idea what's really going on, and we just speak at a, two different sides of our mouth all the time when it's talking about politics. There's one kind of obscure, I shouldn't say obscure, but it's not maybe necessarily the most well-known part of the Constitution that may have some bearing here in the take care clause. So can you kind of help us understand the take care clause and how that has relevance to what's happening with Trump and what that means like for the presidential power in America? And because probably many of us don't even understand how much power a president does have. It feels very confusing. Sometimes it feels like the president can come to your house and kill you if he wants. And then sometimes it feels like he can't do anything and you can say whatever you want with no repercussions. So what help us understand presidential power as it comes to this take care clause?
Well, what we definitely do not want is for the president to be able to come to your house and kill you. That would be
for sure.
That would be the opposite of what Protect Democracy famously
that would be
said
a really bad
was
result.
That Article 2, which is the article of the Constitution that lays out the executive power and presidential powers, gave him the ability and the power to do, quote, anything I want with the Department of Justice. Meaning democracy is trying to accomplish. But I think, but that, and we joke, but we've almost reached the point where it's not such a joke anymore, because when Donald Trump was president, one of the things that I can use it in whatever, right? I can use the vast law enforcement powers of the United, I can use the vast law enforcement powers of the United States any way I want to use them in my own personal interest to help myself, help my friends, and harm my perceived enemies and opponents. And that really is the very essence of what an autocracy would look like. And it's actually the complete opposite of what Article 2 sets out. Article 2 allows for a very powerful, very robust executive branch. We've seen over the years, people argue for something they call the unitary executive, which is the idea that all of the executive power essentially lives in and is vested in the president. And that makes him, or hopefully someday her, a very powerful actor within the system. But, and there is a very big but, Article 2 lays out that the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. So the primary duty of the president is not to wield power, personal power, on behalf of him or herself, but rather to act as the guardian of our laws and to ensure that they are faithfully, meaning faithful to our Constitution, faithful to our laws, faithful to something, if you will, higher than yourself. That is the president's ultimate duty, is to the public, to the country, to the Constitution and our laws, and not to himself. And every federal employee who takes the oath of office, as I once did very proudly, has that derivative duty, that derivative power. And, we swear to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And that is a public duty, not a personal duty. And anytime you have people viewing the government as their personal tool, rather than as a public service and a service to the people, that's when we get way off track. And when people say, there are no rules that govern any of this, that is the primary one. It's our Constitution. And, that take care clause really does mean something. And, I think that's one of the things Protect Democracy has really tried to do in the life of our existence, is to help people to understand what public service is all about, what presidential service is all about. And it really does rest in that take care duty.
Wow.
Yeah.
So sad.
Well, Trump did mention that he wanted to suspend the Constitution. So you can't have the take care clause without the Constitution. So check and mate.
It almost seems I think one of the problems that we have right now is actually, it almost seems unfair to cover the things that Trump actually says. Because when you speak the words that he actually uses, it's almost like, well, it's unfair to say that he said that because that is such a completely autocratic, insane thing to say. But, we need to all recognize what we're living through right now and that we really are being given a choice between, continuing the system of government that we've been trying to perfect, since 1789, or chucking it for something completely different. And again, we talk about stakes. Those are the stakes.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about, what politically motivated investigations or the characteristics of what a politically motivated investigations would look like. Can either of you give an example, either, current or past, of what you would consider fits, that description, that title, and I mean, like some of the notes I wrote down was like, okay, was the James Comey announcement about Clinton, a politically motivated investigation, or the Alvin Bragg 34 count indictment, or even like the House trying to get Trump's taxes, so maybe give us some examples so we can kind of wrap our head around what that means.
So what I would encourage people to do is, like, again, go back to that report and look at the key questions and look at some of the things that it talks about investigators and prosecutors doing that would make an investigation appear to be more politically motivated than proper. So when you have things like the president, telling the Attorney General, I want you to investigate such and such a person. I want that person to be prosecuted. They've been pursuing a hoax witch hunt investigation against me. I want you to open an investigation against them. We're going to find out that these people were engaged, in the worst witch hunt of all time. We saw that happen. That actually happened when Donald Trump essentially ordered his attorney general to open what became the Durham investigation into the people who investigated him. And that is not to say that it's never appropriate. And the inspector general, in fact, did an investigation of the way that the FBI conducted the Russia probe, because it's really important to make sure that law enforcement follows all the rules that it's supposed to follow, both so that it does not violate people's rights and reach the wrong results, but also so that it doesn't screw up cases and cost the public the ability to hold people accountable when they deserve to be held accountable. So it's okay to investigate the investigators sometimes, and that's why we have inspectors general in the department. But what's not okay is to start an investigation by presuming the guilt of the subjects, announcing that to the world through the presidential bully pulpit, and then having your investigator start with a conclusion that he is supposed to validate through the course of the investigation. And then I think, what we saw with that investigation, in addition to all of the wrong ways in which it got started, was also then, pursuing a couple of people to the point of trial, both of whom were pretty spectacularly acquitted, which gives you a sort of a sense of how the law and the objective legal process views the whole thing. So I think, this is not to say that John Durham, who was a career civil servant before he became a U.S. attorney, started out to be a politically motivated person. But when your investigation starts in the way that one did, it's really dead on arrival from the standpoint of it being a fair investigation. And then I think you can contrast that with Again, we don't know what the outcomes of these things are going to be, or whether Trump is even going to be charged by anybody other than the Manhattan DA. But, you haven't seen Joe Biden demanding that Donald Trump be prosecuted. You haven't seen him directing the Attorney General to do things. You have not seen the Attorney General, people get frustrated with the Attorney General because he doesn't talk very much at all about any of these things. So I think there's a real contrast to what you saw, with, say, the Durham investigation and what we're seeing now. And we're seeing basically career prosecutors who nobody even knows their names. We learned the other day in Rolling Stone that Trump wants to learn their names so that he can retaliate against them, which, again, I would argue is, the thing you're not supposed to see. So I think there's a real contrast. I think people can look at that. That doesn't mean that we know what the outcome is going to be. There's several intermediate processes. There's grand juries considering indictments. There's jurors considering evidence and with the reasonable doubt standard. So there's all sorts of things before we get to an end game. But I think there is a lot that you can look at to compare and contrast how things are supposed to go in a rule of law system versus how they go when you don't have that.
Right. It's funny because you're starting to talk about the Durham Report, and we kind of want to move over into that a little bit because of how it's come out in the last month and what it means. And I had a friend that mentioned the Durham Report, and I've had actually a couple of friends. Well, don't you know the Durham Report? So I just want to kind of talk about that, right? And maybe, Anne, if you could just help us define, help anyone who's seen this and isn't a news junkie like Will and doesn't, lives under a rock like me. What is the Durham Report, and what is it? Why was it even instigated, and what did it find out? Did it find anything new out that we should know about?
Well, I may pass this back to Christy for the answer to some of that, but
sure.
There's not a lot new there, and what we knew from the beginning was that Trump thought that the investigation into whether or not Russia was interfering in our elections was illegitimate because of the way it touched his campaign, and for all the reasons we've talked about. Since the beginning, that is an inappropriate premise on which to begin an investigation, and that necessarily affected the way it progressed. Now, did the FBI do absolutely everything right? No, it looks like they did not do absolutely everything right, because it's very rare that any institution does everything absolutely right. Did John Durham find evidence that there was a witch hunt designed to topple the Trump administration? No, he did not find evidence that was the case. I don't know, Christy, if you want to add anything about that report.
No, I think that about sums it up. I mean, I think that one of the outcomes of it all was really a sort of like, okay, how long did we go on to come up with nothing different from what the Inspector General concluded, several years ago about procedural things that went wrong in the investigation. But there is absolutely nothing to indicate that the FBI should not have been concerned and should not have been investigating the efforts that Russia was making. And I think it is objectively true that this is what happened. The Senate Intelligence Committee, the bipartisan committee, confirmed this, that, Russia was trying to did interfere in an American election. And there were people close to Donald Trump who welcomed that interference. And frankly, Donald Trump, again, it's not being mean to him to talk about the things that he said. He openly announced that he would welcome, more WikiLeaks and, anything Russia wanted to, let him know about Hillary Clinton. He was all for that. So that is just stuff that objectively happened. And, I think one of the things that was especially pernicious about the resources of and the powers of the Justice Department being used the way that they were with the Durham Report is that so many people 6 years later don't understand and don't really care about the fact that a foreign country that has not typically been friendly to the United States tried to affect one of our elections. Yeah. That doesn't mean that the wrong person, came out the winner in the election. Nobody is questioning whether Donald Trump actually won that election. But, it also should not be questioned that a hostile foreign power tried to interfere in it, and that may be ongoing, and that we haven't paid attention to the fact that it's ongoing because of all of this obfuscation that has been allowed to grow up around it. And I think, when you talk about protecting democracy, we're in a vulnerable position because of that. Our intelligence apparatus has been compromised by our inability as a nation to focus collectively on our common enemies that are common to us regardless of what our, political party is.
Yeah, I don't know about you folks, but whenever I hear or see people, do this is a Russia hoax or something like that, it's like nails on a chalkboard for me because like I've been following this stuff like even before Trump was elected. I mean, it was one of these things where I saw that Trump kind of had an affinity towards Russia, read a lot of articles, and then I started monitoring Russian media. Like I downloaded the RT app probably to my, my own detriment, I'm sure. Sputnik, and I'm reading all these articles, and it just seems like they just love Trump, and I'm like, that's weird, that there's this sort of love for them. So when people talk about, yeah, there was no collusion, there was no this, there was no that, Russia, whatever. It just annoys me, and I feel the people that have read or at least have heard or learned about the Durham Report aren't weighing it properly against the troves of other data that we've got out there. I mean, there's the Mueller Report, the Senate Intel Report, the Michael Horowitz report, the IG, and I'd love for you to just kind of put the Durham Report in perspective in relation to these other reports. Like is it just like a summary of all the other ones and they left out all the juicy stuff that would actually point towards Russia interference or what? And either one of you guys can answer that.
I mean, I guess I would say that it's nothing like any of the others, precisely for the reasons that we've been talking about. It was not an investigation that was started on the premise of let's find out what happened here. Let's find out the truth about what happened here. It was an after the fact engineered process to try to draw attention away from all of the investigations that were aimed at doing that. Robert Mueller's investigation was aimed at trying to figure out to what degree Russia interfered in our election and who assisted them in doing that. The Senate Intelligence Committee's investigation was the same. It was aimed at trying to figure out to what degree we were compromised by Russian interference in our election. The Inspector General's report had a different mandate, but it was premised on let's find out whether the FBI followed all of its rules and procedures and did things the right way in conducting this law enforcement operation. The Durham investigation was conceived in order to, again, draw attention away from all of those other things. And it was, and what it did was show precisely what the point of weaponized justice really is, which is to, create bad outcomes, anti-democratic outcomes. And it did that. It achieved that. And I think that's what I would hope in retrospect, a lot of people could focus on is that this is the real danger when somebody uses the law enforcement powers of the government in ways that they are not supposed to be used and violates the take care clause and all of the things that we've been talking about. Because again, it leaves us all in a much more vulnerable position than we should be, and not one that, is what a democracy is supposed to bring us to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, Ann.
Well, I was just going to say, we talked at the beginning about some about the weaponization of government committee and maybe its flaws to date. I would love to see some attention paid by that committee to the origin of the Durham Report, but more to the point, honestly. The Senate Intelligence Committee and its report is a good example of how Congress can work and why it is so important to have congressional oversight as a check on executive power. Here you have a committee where the staff are historically, some of the most talented on Capitol Hill. They work together to a degree that is not always present on other committees. There really is bipartisan cooperation in their investigations. Both parties have staff at their interviews. Both parties have equal access to documents and to strategy. And then when the committee issues a report, both the chairman and the ranking member, the representatives of both parties come out and endorse it. And there was a lot in there that should have worried us about Russia's interference. And you have an investigation there with the hallmarks of thorough and appropriate oversight. Like, send people there. They can read for themselves what these bipartisan investigators found about what Russia was trying to do.
Yeah, totally.
It was if I remember correctly, it was Mark Warner and Burr, right? Richard Burr.
That's
they were the leaders, and unfortunately, what happened to Burr and some of his whatever trading stuff. But I actually liked him. I mean, I thought him and Warner worked really well together. So
no, that's funny. It's funny because I have no idea who you're talking about. And that's what's really funny.
Well, everyone should make their summer beach read the Senate Intelligence Committee Report.
Or the Mueller Report. What is that like?
It'll make you
pages?
But the Senate Intelligence Committee report can make you feel warm and fuzzy about the prospects for actually bipartisan problem solving that we need to have in order to continue to exist as a free republic.
I always joke with people because I read the Mueller report like 2 times and I listened to the audio version because
he's weird. That's why. There's no other reason.
That may qualify you as a Muellerologist.
I didn't know
yes,
such
a master
existed,
Mueller.
but like I don't know if it was just like a troll from Amazon, but like I swear, like a few days after the Mueller report came out, they had a free like audio version of the Mueller report. Like you didn't have to pay for it, you just download it. So I listened to it, and all 434 pages of it. I even try to read like the unredacted versions when Jason Leopold, who used to be for BuzzFeed, I think, or Daily Beast, anyways, but he's like the FOIA king, and so he'd always produce these like unredacted versions, and I'm like, sweet, it's like a new chapter of the book that I didn't get a chance to read yet.
These are the things Will gets excited about, by the way.
It is. It really is. And like whenever anybody talks to me about Russia, I always just point to the whole like the Paul Manafort thing. It's just a real big stick for me because I'm just like, for me, that's the straightest line to Russia interference that I could draw, because he used to be the campaign manager for Viktor Yanukovych, that thing that kind of started the whole Orange Revolution thing. And he was passing polling data to Konstantin Kalemnik, who, like, I don't know. Like, that's not a good actor. So, anyways, I'll get off my Russian high horse because I know Josh has a
No, I
question.
love the Russian high horse, man. It's you can stay on the high horse as long as you want. You'd be like Putin, doesn't he love riding Russian horses, high horses
Yes,
with it shirtless? You're just not shirtless.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
he likes to be.
My dad bod would not get us clicks.
You don't have your Putin bod. So, okay, so this is what's and just to give you some perspective. So we have a lot of different people that listen to the show and from wide perspectives. And I'm like the token conservative. I'm a pastor. I'm a Christian, right wing, blah, blah, blah. And then Will is the token liberal, all those things. But one of the things we try to do, right, is we try to get exposure to both sides and try to help people think on it, like just take the conversation up a bit. Like we say, not left, not right, but up. We want to take the conversation up a little bit. Let's get a meta conversation going on and even figuring out what we're actually even doing, what we're fighting about. And one of the things that I have a lot of conservative friends. And I remember like in 2008, I remember when Obama got elected again, actually in 2012. And I was with some buddies and very conservative. And I'm telling you, I had friends that were crying because they thought it was the end of America as we know it, essentially. They thought, and maybe it was, I don't know, but maybe it was the America he wanted and not the America everyone else wanted. But it's like, I remember people being so scared, like, oh, they're creating concentration camps for us up in Wisconsin and they're going to take all the conservatives. I'm like, oh my gosh, dude, this is like, I never got into politics that much. But when we're looking at these reports, like something like the Durham Report comes out, and like, what do you think it is about a report like this that keeps this going? Like, for instance, if we have in the Mueller Report that Trump, like, had all these, or people around him, all these instances of obstruction of justice, why is it that nothing happens? Why is it that, is it just because I guess like, what is the Durham Report comes out, people are now like, oh, look, everything we said, it's in what's going on here that people just like grasp on to this report? I don't know if the question I'm asking makes sense. I just would like to get your perspective on this from where you guys work. Cause people believe this. Really believe this, and they're genuine good people. Like that, I'm not mad at them. I'm not going to call them racist for voting for Trump. I'm just not going to do that because they're genuine people, and they're genuine, and people have flaws. But it gets very confusing and very tiring for me. So what do you got? Like, what's your take on like all of this? Why did it come out? What's going on? And what?
I can't explain it, from a sociological point of view, but just as a person. And Ann and I both, come from parts of the country where there are a lot of conservative people. My family are evangelical Christians. So, I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of good people with very real fears of what's happening in the world. And it feels like there are just a lot of things driving us all toward tribal taking of sides,
Yes.
which leads people to look for things that fit the narrative that they are trying to construct about the universe. And we don't seem to have as many places where people can come together and just speak to each other as humans and talk about like, look, is this the thing that should have happened here? Again, regardless of what you think about like, what our national policies should be on any given thing, do we really think that Donald Trump is the kind of person who is the right person to have in charge of our country? And if he has violated rules or violated laws, should he get away with that? And I often turn back to what I used to do before I came to protect democracy, which was enforce the civil rights laws, oftentimes in places where you wouldn't necessarily think that, oh, well, this is a huge pro-civil rights community. I used to go to places and ask jurors to hold police officers accountable who had violated the law. And one of the things that made me feel optimistic about society when I did that is that in that environment where nobody was thinking about, well, what political party am I from? What political party is she from? When the question was simply, should a law enforcement officer who exercises vast power on behalf of the state not have to follow the same laws that he's able to enforce on you? And it was most of the time like very heavy majority agreement that no, nobody should get to violate those rules. Everybody should play by the rules. Everybody should be treated fairly. We should judge people according to what they do, not to which, according to which tribe that they are from. And I don't have the answer for what we can do to be able to get us all into rooms like that where we can have those kinds of discussions. But to me, that's a large part of it. And again, just to bring it back to protect, to bring it back to protect democracy's mission, that's why we're a cross-partisan organization, is we're looking for the things that bring us all together as one people in a government that is by the people and for the people, and where we can accept defeat when we lose, and where our main mechanism of trying to win people over to our ideas is to persuade them that we're right, and to keep trying.
That's a novel idea.
if they don't agree with us, right? But to stay in the conversation, and to just recognize that we do have things that we can all agree on. We just have to take do the hard work to recognize that we do still have that.
Yeah. So my last question to you both is regarding the AG, Merrick Garland, and and to whatever degree Lisa Monaco too, if there is any input to have. I mean, just to put my cards on the table, I've spoken to some people who clerked for Merrick Garland, and they think that he's actually a pretty good guy. Not partisan or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't work in DC. I'm not a lawyer. I've never had to stand in front of him when he was a judge, so you all might have some different opinions about him, but I'd love to kind of get your thoughts about, his not necessarily job performance, but his ability to protect democracy, because he plays a very important role. There's a lot of I have a lot of empathy for the role that he's in during this presidency. Between Trump, Hunter Biden, and everything in between, he's got a tough job. So can you guys just talk a little bit about, his level or his ability to protect democracy, and if you think he's doing a good job there? Andy, you can go first.
Sure. Well, I, like you, have a lot of empathy for the position he's in, to follow Bill Barr and the Trump administration and try to reset the norms of an independent Justice Department is a really it's a tall task. And he clearly, entered the job with a desire to stay out of the political maelstrom and, quietly do the work of the Department of Justice. He is dealing with these Trump probes and with the president's son being investigated. He appointed special counsel in both instances. And I think he has, in speech and action, tried to show the sort of impartial, apolitical administration of the Department of Justice. Now, I have empathy for him because it's an almost impossible task, and there will always be people who think he should have or could have moved faster, or think he should have or could have spoken more forcefully. And I'm not going to second guess those things here. I think if you look at the objective criteria like the ones we laid out in our report, he is meeting those criteria when it comes to impartial administration of justice.
Christy?
Yeah, I think just to follow on that, I think one of to bring it back to the report that brought us all together here, if you look at the things that an attorney general is supposed to do, and that's, I often talk about how I would love to be a fly on the wall at the 5th floor over at the Justice Department to find out what's going on with all of these investigations. But from the standpoint of, what he has done outwardly and how he has conducted himself and what he has projected to the public, people should go to the DOJ website and look at the Department of Justice's strategic plan, which is really his doing. And you'll see in there that a huge component of it is protecting the department from political influence. So he clearly saw it as his role when he came to the job to restore the independence of the department and to really, instill again in the people who work there that their job is the nonpartisan, impartial application of the rule of law. So we can look to see if anything deviates from that, and if Donald Trump wants to file a motion, if he's indicted, saying that he's been selectively prosecuted, a judge can listen to what evidence he's got of that. But from everything that we are seeing, things are being done according to the letter of the law and the rules. And, that's a refreshing thing to see. And that's all that we can hope for. And I would hope that the next Republican attorney general views the job the same way. And if so, we'll be good.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because I don't know if a lot of people know, especially like in the Durham report, it seems like Durham went out of his way to thank Merrick Garland.
Yes, he did.
I was talking to somebody recently that he didn't necessarily extend the same kind of gratitude towards Merrick Garland's predecessor, which I don't know. I mean, it may or may not mean anything, but just the fact that he did say, "Hey, thanks, Merrick Garland, for staying out of our stuff."
Yeah, and I think again, we know these people by their words and their deeds, and he on his cover letter releasing his report, he went out of his way to thank the Attorney General for allowing the investigation to proceed independently and for not interfering in it. And I think that, that's, one of the best signs that we can have of some little small modicum of nonpartisanship and independence. And we really need all of those that we can get.
Yes, indeed we do. Indeed we do. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Christy and Ann. It's been such a pleasure to have you guys. How can people stay updated on your work and what's in the docket next? What are you guys working on that you want to let everyone know about today?
Oh, Ann, what do you got?
Well, we have a website and is very frequently updated, and you can sign up for a mailing list there to get reports as they come.
The website is protectdemocracy.org.
That's
.org. Yes, .org. And you can see there a lot of the various different. We've got some lawsuits that we're doing on behalf of some,
awesome.
Really interesting folks who've done their part to uphold democracy. So yeah, we would really not only encourage people to visit the website, but to get in touch with us if you want to be part of this fight, because like Ann and I have both said, we all have an interest in maintaining this democracy we have and in making it, even better than what it's ever been. And yeah, it's a good fight to be in. So Please come join us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. Of course, this has been your faithful host, Josh Bertram, and our political host, Will Wright. And thanks again, Christy Parker and Ann Tyndall from Protect Democracy. We want you guys to check out their stuff, support them, do everything you can to be a part of what they're doing. And until next time, stay up. Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Bye.